Hey, my go-getters, Christie here. Welcome to the Misi Muse Unplugged podcast. We've got an amazing show lined up for you today. If this is your first time listening, thanks for tuning in. The Misi Muse Unplugged podcast is produced every other Friday for your enjoyment. Show information, as well as any links shared on today's episode, can be found at www.misimuse.com. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed, SoundCloud, or iTunes. You can also follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Just search for Christie Lindor or check out my blog at www.christielindor.com. Have a question about consulting? Would like to be a guest on the show? We would love to hear from you. Drop us a line at misimuseunplugged@gmail. That's misimuseunplugged@gmail. Now let's get on with today's show.
You are now tuned in to the Misi Muse Unplugged, a pop-up podcast variety show helping consultants along their journey to greatness with your host, management consultant, author and blogger, Christie Lindor.
Hey, go-getters. Christie Lindor here. I am super excited to have Nitya on today's show for a segment I like to call Drama in the Team Room. And so Nitya is going to share kind of an experience that she recently had with us and hopefully, be able to provide some insights for you all that may be going through something similar. So Nitya, welcome to today's show.
Thank you for having me, Christie.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. Glad to have you as well. So before we get started, maybe you can just give us a little bit of a context of your background and, what type of consulting work you do and kind of introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. So, hi, everyone. My name is Nitya, and I recently came into consulting. I have a background in biology and biotechnology, and afterwards I worked in industry, like as a clinical project coordinator. And just 3 years ago now, I got introduced to consulting while I was applying for some new positions. And since then, it's been a roller coaster of a ride. I'm still learning so many things, and I like the field. It keeps me on my toes, so I'm excited to be learning and also, being able to share my experiences on this forum.
Yeah, thank you. So I feel like I knew you were new to consulting. I didn't realize you had like that bio background. So thank you for sharing that context. So now you've recently switched over to a new consulting firm, but a couple years ago, I know you and I have been talking for quite some time, and I know you were sharing a really interesting scenario that happened to you. So maybe if you can, if you can kind of rewind a bit and share a little bit about your first consulting role and kind of, how things were going and what kind of happened that started to prompt a shift in which ultimately led to you leaving. So maybe you could share a little bit with everyone.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I came from clinical research background in industry, not in consulting. And so while I was looking to leave my then current company, I was contacted by a boutique consulting firm, looking to hire me for one of their clients. And so I was really intrigued because, the way that they had described what my experience in consulting would be like was amazing, because I was looking for something that would give me a lot of knowledge in a short amount of time. Not necessarily, in a way that it's like, the quickest way to get rich sort of way, but, just continuously growing and like moving forward. So I decided to, join the firm, and initially it was really good because, I felt like I had a good team and good support, and the project that I was hired for, unfortunately, it fell through. So, I was on bench for a little while, which was confusing to me because I sort of didn't know what to do. I was proactive about it. I reached out to my my leaders, people who hired me, just to help out with anything. And so I spent about 6 months on bench, and then I eventually got onto a project. So this project, I was, and before, actually, let me rewind a little bit. So before I signed on with this company, I, wanted to make sure that we both were on the same page because I had never done consulting in my life, So I just wanted to make sure that they knew that I don't know anything. I would need a lot of learning and development and, in a space where I would be able to do that, leaders who would be able to teach me. So that is eventually what.
I was going to try to jump right in, Nitya. So given that, when this boutique firm reached out to you, at that time, were you interested in consulting, or was it just like this opportunity came up and it was intriguing and you said, you know what, let's give it a try? Just wanted to get that clarity.
It was a lot. I had no idea what consulting was before they reached out. And so after they reached out to me and I went through the interview process, it was intriguing. I was excited, so I thought, why not? And that's how I started. So now when I'm on a project, I just, I was under the impression that, the people who were deciding what project I get onto, what team I'm with, would know that, I'm a junior consultant. So I would need to be under a senior manager who would be willing to, guide me, show me how to do certain things, like allow me to understand what the client wants, and then be able to deliver that. But obviously, as a new consultant, you can't just straight away, start delivering the material straight to the client. Like you need, your manager to look over your work and make sure it's in tip-top condition. And if it's not, then, I expected that they would let me know what I'm doing wrong and then I'd course correct.
Rightfully so, by the way. And I've actually worked with a lot of people that did come from industry, not been in consulting. So I think you're absolutely right. Like, I think that is an expectation, but I think, on their part, that's something that they should have offered you because you don't know, and that's, consulting is a little different from other industries. So I think you have the right expectation. So
that's really good to hear because, I always feel like, so after that experience, I just feel that, okay, now I know that I definitely have to ask the right questions. I can't just blindly trust my upper management to, know what engagement to put me in, even though we've had this conversation before that I'm a very junior business analyst and I need a lot of support.
Right.
So hindsight, I could have done some things that would have allowed me to, avoid the disaster that occurred. So basically, during the project, it just happened that there were misaligned expectations. I think the client expected me to be more experienced, being able to deliver right away. And I guess my manager just thought that I would know everything and she wouldn't have to review or give me guidance. So if I had asked the right questions, day one with my manager, okay, like what are the expectations of the clients? What are your expectations? Then maybe we could have had that conversation to avoid what ended up being, I think, it was a tough learning experience for me because, I come from, up to that point, I was not used to failure, and that was very, very, very hard. But I think it was a growing experience, So ultimately, I was let go from that project, but not from the company.
So in other words, Nitya, if I can just recap what you just shared. So you were put on this project, the client expected a lot more from you. It sounded like their project manager also expected a lot more from you than you were actually able to deliver in their eyes, given that you were coming in as a business analyst, 2-3 years industry experience, first time consulting, and what you're saying is that you essentially got, rolled off of that first engagement. How long did it take, from when you started the project to getting rolled off?
3 to 4 weeks. There was holidays in between, so yeah, it was pretty quick. And I honestly did not understand what happened because when we were returning from the holiday break, right the day before, the person who had hired me into the company had called me and was like, you don't need to go back to that site again. And he was nice about it. It wasn't anything. He didn't really let me know what happened, basically, directly. And so after that phone call, I didn't go back to the site, but eventually, I had to talk to the project manager and return the materials. And it was just a really weird, strange situation.
So hold on. I want to make sure I understand. So let's pretend like let's say your engagement manager, let's pretend her name was Jennifer, right? So Jennifer was on site with the client, but it wasn't Jennifer that gave you the message of you rolling off. It was someone else from your practice that did? I want to make sure I understand this.
Yes, that's correct. So this person is pretty high up in the chain, and he is responsible for, hiring talent and placing them on projects. But he had multiple roles because it's a boutique, small consulting firm, so you sort of wear a lot of hats. But he was the person who had convinced me to join the company. I had that conversation with him about, I really don't know anything. You can't expect me to just, hit the ground running without any support. So I had just automatically assumed that, he would have placed me in a project that would be more for my skills, or, in a team or under a manager who also understood that. But what I've learned, you should never assume anything in consulting. And so always ask questions. That's the biggest thing I can tell you, So that was the situation.
Yeah, so maybe you can give us a little bit more of, going back to the scenario of the 3 weeks. Was there any moment, Nitya, during that 3-week period that, and again, I'm just going to keep using the name Jennifer, that Jennifer mentioned something to you? Was there a conversation? It just seems really odd that, she's the one that, had the misalignment, but she's not the one that gave you that message. So was there any defining moment when you realized, this was not going well?
Today's episode is brought to you on behalf of the Misi Muse. 100 plus selected practices, unwritten rules and habits of great consultants. A book by Christie Nitya. Written in the voice of a mentor, the Misi Muse provides insights on the unwritten rules of great consultants, a perfect read for new or aspiring consultants. Christie dives into her 15 plus years of consulting experience while sharing interviews and anecdotes from over 50 consulting partners and leaders that represents thought leadership from 80% of the top 10 consulting firms in the world. Pre-sale begins shortly. Sign up at www.misimuse.com.
So it was actually my very first meeting. Okay, so my first week on site, the client was not prepared to have me on site. I had literally no access to anything. I had no background materials for anything. And so, my first week on site was really strange, and I just took it with stride. I, spoke to my manager, and, she tried to get me materials to prepare me, but it wasn't really anything helpful. It was more for getting training for the site, just the company, not related to my project. So, second week, the meetings started to happen, and I started sitting in on the meetings, trying to understand what the project's about, the background stuff that I needed. And so after one of the meetings, so there was a deliverable that I needed to do, which had to do with process flows. And, I had never done process flows before. I didn't even know what process flows were before that time. So after the meeting, I was expecting to sit down with my manager. I had talked to her, and I wanted to ask her these questions because even though I do have a biology background and I came from clinical research industry, the client, even though it is in life sciences, it was completely different what the project was for. It was some sort of system implementation, and I had never done anything with systems or, anything IT related. So I had tried to reach out to her, and I tried to set up some meetings, but she sort of just brushed me off. And so, for a while I kept trying, and then I reached out to the person who had placed me on the project, and it was just not going anywhere. So then by the end of that second week, I had a meeting where I was supposed to gather information for my deliverable. So I gathered the information, tried to ask as many questions as I could, and then, after the meeting, went to work, trying to figure out how to do process flows. And so, what I had expected was, okay, I will send this deliverable to my manager so she can review it and let me know what I missed, how I can do better. But I never heard from her. She just didn't respond. She didn't send me anything back. So by that time, I started feeling really uneasy. And then that's when, Thanksgiving break happened, and then I came back, and it was just not a good situation. So, and then by the end of that week, I was rolled off.
So when the rolling off happened and you got the phone call, from the person that hired you, what was going on in your mind at that time? I mean, you're new to consulting. I mean, did you even really know what that really meant?
Not really, because, I had heard stories even before that real engagement, what had happened in those 6 months when I was on the bench, I would go onto a project and help out, but then something would happen and then that project would fall through. So we wouldn't have that project. Everything was really, really, really roller coastery. My experience in the first 6 months was just up and down, up and down. So by the time that this experience actually happened, I was like, okay, well, I mean, I just didn't understand. I guess I was thinking okay, I probably did something wrong, but maybe not, because the client engagements fall through, and, maybe that's what happened to this one. And so, it wasn't until, I had to go back on site and give my laptop back, and so that my project manager actually, I don't know, she tried to talk to me, because by that time I'd understood that it was something that I did, and I wasn't good enough, I guess. That's when it, all sort of made sense. So I never really had a real conversation with anybody about what happened. And and then over the months, after that happened, my company, I think they were nice enough to let me still explore or wait for opportunities for another 6 months. But unfortunately, that just wasn't the case. And then I was rolled off when a lot of the company that I was with had a lot of setbacks in terms of projects. And so I sort of was let go with a batch of people.
Wow. That is a really, really, it's a really intense situation you went through, Nitya, to get put on be brought into this firm, sit on the bench for 6 months. And that's actually what happened to me in my first role out of college. Different reasons, but, to sit, I didn't know people still sat on the bench for 6 months these days. So that was really surprising when you shared that. So to sit there for 6 months, be put on the wrong project, not be given support, then feeling like you did something wrong, which you clearly didn't, given that it just sounded like it was just a lot of misalignment all the way around, and then being eventually let go. That's a lot. What in your mind kind of kept you wanting to be in consulting after that experience?
Well, after that experience, I took a little bit of time off, and I really wanted to think about if I wanted to be in consulting. So I took a couple months and really thought about it. And, what kept me wanting to give consulting another shot is that, when everything was good, it was really good. And I was really excited to learn. And there's so much information. And I just felt yes, it just felt right. This is where I want to be. But when it was bad, it was really bad. But I also feel that, I just think the company wasn't ready for somebody like me. I was the only really green consultant they had hired. And so I thought, okay, I would like to still give this industry a try, because just at another company who is equipped to train somebody like me. Because I think, for me, I would have needed a big project team, more than just a manager, to be able to give me the support that I need And at the time, they didn't really have many of those projects, if any at all, that involved big teams. It was more like 2 people from our company going on client side and helping them with the project. But at the same time, it's, I feel like that sort of project team, it's really hard to learn and then also be able to deliver on time, the things that the client would want. So it just wasn't a very good environment for me. And I think the person who had hired me had really good intentions. The consulting company I joined was it was small, and so the person who had hired me, he came from a consulting company, also boutique company, but, they had been around for 20 years and they were used to training young, really fresh consultants. So I think he had good intentions, but just didn't work out because, everything in consulting, nothing is set in stone. So, and a lot of it depends on, what kind of work you're able to get.
Hey, go-getters! Have feedback on today's show? Questions on consulting? Want to be a guest? We'd love to hear from you. Just drop us a line at mcmuseunplugged@gmail.com. That's mcmuseunplugged@gmail.com. You can also show us your support by downloading episodes, spreading the word to friends and family, or leaving us a review. Remember, Misi Muse Unplugged is a pop-up podcast, which means we'll stick around as long as we continue to hear from you. Thank you for your support. Now back to today's show.
You sound so mature as you kind of talk through that experience. And I'm glad that you did give it a try because I think you're right. There's just so much in the right environment. It goes back to the culture and the support and, kind of knowing where you want and what you need and the firm that can fit that. So even though it was a roller coaster, I am personally glad that you gave it another shot because I think you're really smart. I think you'd be a great consultant just from the times you and I have connected in the past. And so I was excited when we reconnected again, and you shared, your new journey. So fast forward, share with us where you are now or what type of work, consulting work now, but share with us where you are just mentally now, given where you've come from.
So I now am working for another boutique consulting company, but this one is a lot bigger and, it's a lot more stable, and it's in life sciences as well. So it has been really good because, that experience allowed me to really find something, ask the right questions during interviews to know, okay, does this consulting company, what kind of projects does it have? How do they staff on their projects? What's the bench rate? These kinds of questions. And I was interviewing for other consulting companies. I had asked them and it just seemed right. It just seemed like the right space, the right time, and exactly what I needed. And so now I've been with this new company for, I would like to say, a year and a half. And within that time, I feel like emotionally and mentally I've grown a lot in the sense that, okay, yes, I am learning a lot of new things about this industry that I am in now. But also, my confidence level has definitely skyrocketed. Like after that experience at my previous company, it really helped. It did not help my self-confidence. So, because, and then when I first got staffed onto a client project in this new company, I had a lot of doubts in myself and in my work. And eventually, gradually that faded. But it was, because of my current project manager, she just knows what people under her need. So she was very good about providing that support to me.
That's awesome.
So now
That's awesome.
I am much more confident in front of clients in my work, and I'm not as scared of making mistakes because I feel like it's okay to make mistakes because you need mistakes to be able to learn from them.
And it sounds like you've built a lot of trust, with your new manager, and it sounds like a really great environment. So I congratulate you that you were able to move on and find a place that is a bit more better in terms of the culture and the leadership support. What would be kind of, if you think about like your top 3 lessons learned from your past experience to where you are now, what would you say they are? And what advice would you give other young consultants like people that are coming from industry going into consulting, what advice would you give to them?
Okay, so, a couple lessons learned. I think the biggest lesson I learned was really just ask the right questions and, get on the same page with your upper management, whether it's on the project or it's just if you're on bench. You always have to be vocal. And then I guess another thing would be, just try to not let setbacks hold you back, because I think another thing that really limited me after that experience at the company was that I had so much self-doubt that it sort of held me back from being my best self for even internal projects, So try not to hold on to that and just, keep moving forward and just know that, consulting, it's never the same, like day in and day out. It's always something new experience. So just be flexible and be positive. That's what I would say.
Well, this was great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm sure, someone out there is going to really benefit from hearing your story, knowing they're not alone. I think the lessons learned you said were spot on. I actually have nothing to add. I think you really said it really nicely. So thank you again for sharing your story, and thanks, listeners, for tuning in today. We'll head on out. Have a great day.
It was my absolute pleasure, Christy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. This pop-up podcast was inspired by my upcoming book, The MECE Muse, 100 plus selected practices, unwritten rules, and habits of great consultants. I have people asking me over the last year many questions about this book, but the one question that comes up constantly is, Christy, you have such a demanding career. How did you find time to write this book? And honestly, the answer is simple. I really sought to become the mentor that I wish I had earlier in my career. In the beginning of my career, I didn't have many mentors, mental maps of what success really looked like. And I really struggled with that in a lot of different ways. But what's nice about struggles is that I overcame them. I grew stronger, more competent, and I'm so excited where I am today in my career. I just want to share, what I've learned and be able to help you. And so I wrote the book, with my years of experience, but I also had an amazing opportunity to connect with over 50 or so consulting partners and leaders across the industry, sharing their stories, their antidotes, their resources on how you could be a great consultant yourself. So do me a favor, pick up your phone right now. Go to www.mecemuse.com. If you scroll down, you'll see a little box that says sign up for the book pre-sale notification. Go ahead and sign up for it. I'd love to hear your feedback on my book as well as the podcast. So thanks again for listening, and here's to your journey to greatness.